Since I was at Poynter, I wanted to show my journalistic bona fide credentials here. So this is a picture from 2003. I was an embedded journalist for the Associated Press with the US Marines in Iraq. And this is actually a missile. As you can see, it's being hidden under a soccer stadium. We did not discover the secret WMDs in Iraq. Like, that is not what this is, but it is, a missile there. And this was one of the assignments that I covered during 12 years working at the AP as a reporter, most of that overseas. And during that time, obviously I did the regular journalism work where I'd go out and I'd talk to people, interview sources, gather information. But at the same time, this was a time of amazing change in media, as we've seen through social media. And this photo, which has been shown already, I think, several times in several presentations of the plane in the Hudson, really exemplifies that. The fact that when news happens now, people post it. Everybody pulls out their smartphone immediately, takes photos, tweets about it, says what's going on. We have this amazing time now where actually every person on the earth is potentially a reporter. But that doesn't mean that everybody is a journalist. So I'll get back to that in a second. And we're also in this amazing time of change of media itself. This is actually a photo from the Coit Tower in San Francisco, these murals that are inside depicting all this kind of old scenes from industry of the San Francisco Chronicle and printing presses. This is how media was produced for decades, but the web is not paper. And we need to rethink how we produce media for the new age. I think it's kind of interesting. We've had several allusions to this today. I mean, the first form of radio was reading things that were on stage. The first form of television programs was having people read like they did radio, but doing it in front of a camera. I mean, we see how each time a new form of media emerges, people take the old practices and try to tack them onto the new before something new emerges. And we're in the middle of this transition right now, where really the internet is a unique medium because the internet is a social medium. And I really want to stress that. When people think about social media, they tend to think Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, those are social media sites. Well, actually, everything on the internet is potentially social and two ways. And that's something we really need to think about as we think about storytelling in the digital age and storytelling on the web as it exists today. So with that brief intro, I was just going to touch on some points about things that we think about at Storify and lessons we've learned. We're still very young in all this, but these are kind of some big points of things that we work on and that we incorporate into Storify, which are about curation, creating feedback loops, being embeddable, and being dynamic, and I'll go into what that means. So curation, this is a word which is the title of this section of this talk, and people talk about that a lot lately. What does that mean? This is actually a photo of my desk when I was the bureau chief for the AP in Korea. And there's a bunch of papers thrown on the desk, a bunch of files, stuff I gathered in the course of doing reporting. I think this really is curation put a different way. It's about editing. It's about taking a lot of information, distilling that down into what's important, giving context to it, and making sense of it for somebody who doesn't have the time to sit there and dig through all these documents. So really, when we think about curation, I think at the heart of it, it's about storytelling. And these are some examples of stories, things that people have put into stories from social media showing what that really is all about. And the important thing behind this is the story. So this tweet, "Go away helicopter before I take out my giant swatter." I mean, I'm sure pretty much everybody's seen this by now. This was someone in Pakistan who happened to be live tweeting the raid on Osama bin Laden. He didn't realize what he was talking about at the time. He heard these explosions and helicopters. It turned out there was somebody there reporting live on this, super secret operation, which is kind of amazing. And this was one of our most quoted tweets of the year, actually, last year in Storify. But, it can be about other stories as well. This is a photo from Joplin, Missouri during the weather disaster, basically, there last year that killed dozens of people. And, it's an interesting photo. It's obviously a church. It's a photo that anybody could have taken, but this was actually from a twit pic where somebody posted, "This is where I got married and where my kids went to school." So the Washington Post put this tweet into one of their stories on Storify, and I think it's kind of interesting to show how pulling something out of that social media fire hose can really tell a compelling story on its own. Steve Jobs' death, that was obviously also one of the biggest stories of last year. And the Daily Beast, using Storify, found a bunch of Apple employees and their reactions to the news. It's not like you could go and walk into the Apple campus as a journalist. It's not one of the most open places in the world, right? But they were able to find people who were talking about it on social media and saying pretty emotional things. I feel sick and my heart is pounding. Everything about this is heartbreaking. Really capturing the event and what that meant to the people there. Another recent story, Facebook buying Instagram, right, for $1 billion, although I think it's actually less than $1 billion given Facebook's share price now. But, and this quote was from a quite known angel investor and entrepreneur in New York, Chris Dixon, who said giving up 1% of your market cap to take out biggest threat is a savvy move. And this was a story that was put together by The Guardian, actually, pulling together reactions of what people were saying about it. There were also funnier reactions, too. Facebook buys Instagram for $1 billion. Idiots. They could have downloaded it for free. So this from another random person. I think when you dig through all these social media fire hose, you can find really interesting things. It's often funny stuff, too. This photo, I think, is interesting, and this is, speaking of hashtags, this was a really interesting hashtag. This is the National Zoo did a story about artificially inseminating a panda there, and they used the hashtag PandaAI. Probably didn't think that's what that stood for, and they were live tweeting this whole thing that they were doing all day, and then they used Storify to pull together all the tweets from that and tell the story of what happened. So again, interesting, different kind of story where they were actually telling their own story and amplifying it in a way so people could remember it. So that's kind of talking about curation. This just, I threw it up quickly, is what Storify looks like when you create a story, and I encourage you to go and kind of check it out. But another thing, too, we have is an iPad app that we launched, and I'm just going to let this play in the background. And I really think, yeah, you don't need the music so loud. Which I think it's interesting to think about curation and tablets and touch interfaces, as that really is going to become more and more the way that people interact with computers. So, a tablet is not good for typing, right? It's a pain. You don't want to type a lot of stuff. What is the way that you will create something on a tablet? And we think that curation actually is quite powerful for that, because it is all about taking things that are out there, dragging it around, remixing it to create something new. So we think that's going to be really a powerful form of creation as more and more people use tablets and don't use laptops anymore. And obviously we see that's the direction of where things are going. So another big idea we think a lot about is not just using social media as a source for what we do with Storify, because we let you search Twitter and Facebook, all these different networks, but how can we push back out to social networks and create, again, a social form of publishing? Like I said, the internet is a social media. So when you quote people by using their tweets in a story, you can actually notify them that they've been quoted with one click, and it'll send them these messages that, hey, you've been quoted in the story. And we find that people really like this, actually. This is an example of just a few tweets of people retweeting the fact that they have been quoted in a story. So by doing that, you're kind of giving somebody something they can share and show off to their friends that, hey, I said something that mattered. And again, as we heard earlier today, just from Sri, most of the stuff you do on social media is not going to be noticed. So the fact that something you do actually is noticed and is preserved, in a story on Storify for more people to see is really, an honor for people, and they really value that. We're also really trying to think about how to push back out to different social networks. So this is a recent thing we just created here, where you can actually take a tweet in a story and share a tweet to Facebook, or actually pin a tweet in Pinterest. So it actually will create an image of the quote and then let you push it out there. So again, the idea here is, social media is a source, but how can we push back out to social media, make everything social in some way, and become an object that then can be, shared more widely? Another big idea is making things embeddable, and this to me really is about thinking of how you can embrace the nature of the internet and not try to fight the internet. Like, I feel like a lot of times people are trying to drive traffic to a site, which makes sense, right? You don't want people to copy and paste your work and put it on another website. You want to make sure they always link back to the original site. But actually, the internet is pretty amazing for letting you syndicate things more widely. Why not let people take your content and share it as widely as possible and get potentially more traffic for what you do by embedding it on other sites? So for us, every story is embeddable, and you can take it and embed it on other sites. And that can be people like the Wall Street Journal here, embedding it on their own site and doing their own work. But what gets interesting is when actually a story kind of goes viral and gets embedded in lots of places. So this was a kind of crazy, voyeuristic, weird story that was rather popular about the restaurant of broken dreams. And what this is this guy who happens to work for the Boston Globe was live tweeting a couple having an argument at a Burger King. Right? And it's pretty interesting, like what he was saying, and this relationship was like breaking up in front of him, and he was live tweeting it. And people saw this happening, and somebody else actually then used Storify to pull together back in order all these tweets. And this story kind of went viral. It's really hard to see. It's quite small here, but it was embedded on dozens of sites. The top one is actually Gawker, which happened to notice it. It was on BuzzFeed too. It was in there. It was on all these different sites. And really, that's something that's unique to the internet, the fact that you can let these things be duplicated everywhere, but still track everywhere that it has been seen and how many views it's getting. So that's something we also try to think about, how to enable that. Don't fight the internet. Another idea is keeping things dynamic. And this story is quite interesting. It's a hospital that's kind of become known for live tweeting various operations. So most recently, they did a brain surgery operation, and they were live tweeting it, live Facebooking it, live Pinteresting, if that's a verb, and also live storifying it and pulling it all together in a story. So throughout the day, they would keep pulling in the latest photos, the latest tweets, the MRI, the person being wheeled into the operating room. I'm sparing you from the more graphic photos that went along with this, but they were constantly updating this, and actually then from the story, posting things back to Pinterest or on Facebook and other social networks. So it was something that you could actually follow along for the whole day and keep watching as the story developed. And another user that's been doing pretty interesting things with that too is actually the White House. So again, thinking about hashtags, the White House has done a couple of times now where they create hashtags for issues that they're trying to get people to talk about. This was about don't double my rate. It was for student loans, and they were trying to get essentially Congress to pass this extension so that student loan rates wouldn't go up, as I'm sure you know about. And they asked people, please tell us your stories. Tell us what you think about this, and we will take the best things and put them into Storify. So this is some of people's stories. They were talking about, don't double my rate. I can't even afford to repay my student loans now. Education is a right for everyone, not just the wealthy. Getting these pretty emotional responses from people. Instagram photos from when Obama spoke at UNC, I think is what that is. And constantly throughout this campaign, they kept updating it, adding new things to it, and creating this dynamic experience. So the story is no longer something you just do, one day, you put it out there, it's like hitting print, it's filed, it's over with, because that's the deadline for the day. I mean, on the internet, the story can be something dynamic. It can be something that lasts over several days or weeks or months. One of our stories that's really amazing long story is about journalists who have been arrested at the Occupy protests. And we have a person who is basically for months, he was constantly adding to this, updating, putting in photos, tweets, other videos, everything about journalists who were arrested, and turned this into really like a lasting kind of document of all this from social media, which otherwise would be totally lost. So again, these 4 big points: curation, creating feedback loops and thinking about it, making things embeddable, and making things dynamic. These are a few of the lessons we've learned so far. We're really young. Storify has still only been really public for a little over a year, and we think we're early in all this, and we're looking to learn much more from how you use it. And thank you very much for having me here today.